The Arab world speaks of democracy, but practices tyranny. We see that the contrast of what is actually happening in the Arab world right now and what the people so desire and so believe that they desire suggests that the Arab world itself is not yet ready for democracy. Ladies and gentlemen, today on Side Proposition, we believe that economic and societal stability are absolutely necessary before we even consider a change in government. My partner Sophia has already explained our first two contentions, which of course are the benefits stability brings to a nation, and she's given this knowledge a theoretical grounding and a pragmatic grounding in our second contention, which explains where stability has worked in the Arab world thus far, such as Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. Now, before I delve into our third contention, which is about how democracy just simply isn't suitable for the Arab world at this time, I'm going to talk about some issues that rose between side opposition and proposition in the first opposition speech. So we see that side opposition has given us this burden to say that we have to say authoritarian regimes are fantastic. And we see this as twisting the subject, twisting the topic, because simply the resolution itself speaks of stability. Whatever form of government besides democracy brings about stability, we see as legitimate. Whether that's communism, whether that's a totalitarian regime, whether that's an oligarchy or a monarchy, we are open to these possibilities under the resolution. So we consider their points that authoritarian rule is awful and therefore we must lose right now ridiculous. Now let's talk about some points that were brought up on side opposition's constructive case that side proposition would like to refute. They talked about how citizens have no say in their government if it's not a democracy. But ladies and gentlemen, let's look at Saudi Arabia. When the Arab Spring happened, the government actually had to propose laws for women's rights. They suggested that women were now eligible to drive. There was a proposed law set forth because the problem is that governments realize in this time of instability that they must restore stability to their citizens in order to stay in power. What they do is they want to provide a good quality of life for their citizens. There's no way you can refute the fact that Kuwaitis actually have one of the highest quality of life in the Arab world and in the world. They have social programs. They have a variety of welfare programs that allow their citizens to practice economic prosperity and economic freedom. We see that on side opposition, they've suggested that if a government is unlikable by a people, then therefore they can just simply be voted out. However, ladies and gentlemen, let's look at Egypt. What happened in Egypt is that there's been 6 changeovers in government in the past 3 years. People are not liking their government and therefore they are re-electing it and underthrowing it by a military coup. What we see happening here is instability, and the cost to the citizens is actually much higher than one would expect. As my partner talked about, there's a safety aspect. There's the idea that human rights are being abused, not just by the government, but by protesters, by violent uprisers. And the only way to stop this is by creating some form of order in the country. Yes?
Could side proposition finally clarify how they're going to bring that order, what type of government they want to use? Because on side opposition, if we prove to you then that democracies are stable, we win.
Thank you. Under this resolution, we see that the word prefer is very important because we prefer the benefits of a stable government right now in the Arab world over the benefits, if you could call them that, of a democracy in the Arab world right now. Now the problem is that they're trying to twist the subject in order to make us forcefully argue for an authoritarian regime. And in some cases, authoritarian regimes can actually have a lot of benefits to their people. We're not saying that there needs to be any type of specific government as long as it's stable. That's what we're arguing for under this resolution. So we see this side on side opposition topples. Now I'm going to talk about going on to our constructive case, I'm going to talk about our third contention, which is essentially that democracy isn't suitable for the Arab world right now. And this is going to throw down all of side opposition's idealist American values of democracy. We see that the Arab world consists of 22 countries, which have a variety of histories, sentiments, and are geographically spaced all over the place, Northern Africa and the Arab Peninsula. The motivation of the Arab Spring consisted of economic decline, extreme poverty, secularism, Islamism, high food prices, and security. So we see that democracy is not a blanket solution to all of these issues. Side opposition is suggesting that what we do is we implement democracy and suddenly that'll fix poverty. We implement democracy and that'll suddenly fix, in a moment, clashes between nationalist Islamists and secularists. We see that on-side opposition, they're suggesting that democracy will fix the increasing violence when actually it'll just aggravate it. Yes, sir.
We saw the United States of America when they started off with their democracy in poverty and war, yet they became a strong democracy. What do you have to say about that?
The fact is that unlike America, there is no separation of church and state at the moment in the Islamic world, nor do they want that. A variety of the democratic governments that were elected in and initially failed were actually consisted of Islamic parties and Christian parties. And the majority of people find their religion a way of life, a daily part of their life, and therefore we can't pretend that America and the Arab world at this time are the same. The problem is the Arab world expects democracy to fix all of its problems, and that is why it is dissatisfied with how it's not the perfect democracy. We see that democracy opens doors to extremist parties because of the discontent people have at the lack of perfection in their government. Now, it's easy to talk about hypothetical extremism, but the fact is that history has proved this over and over again. We looked at Germany in 1933, which actually elected Hitler to power. He was democratically elected, and the problem is that the country itself was undergoing such instability that people saw this as the only way out. Not at this time. We see that the Arab world is heading down a similar road. Let's look at the Salafi group, which is gaining presence in Syria, Lebanon, and Egypt. They are a primarily religious group under the Sunni Muslim Puritan type of sect, and historically they've been condemned in politics. Yet they are gaining support on a daily basis simply because they promise to fix the amount of instability in the country. What we see is that we need to implement some government that will provide stability to the people so that they don't elect another Adolf Hitler. We see that the political scene needs to develop before anyone can be elected. We don't know who these people are. Whether or not their history shows that they are good political leaders. We see that what we really need is leaders who will stick through their country for the next couple of years and prove that they are willing to send their country into a better future. Their accomplishments can be scrutinized and parties can be formed on ideas of how to run a country rather than just opposing how the country is being run at the moment. This creates a productive state rather than an angry, accusatory state. Democracy, ladies and gentlemen, in the Arab world is not a shining knight in armor. It will not end the tribal feuds that have dictated politics in the region since the beginning of time. Nor will it prevent the violence that we see coming about from instability. It will not alleviate the economic hardships that the Arab world is going under right now, and that every person in every region is facing. Most likely, democracy will actually aggravate these problems. And this is why we, on Side Proposition, stand proud to oppose. Thank you.
Stand proud to oppose.
I thank the member for her remarks. The second opposition.